Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and when Sweep was first announced to be changed, or in the whole gem announcements for changes, we did see Sweep, and we were pretty interested by the fact that it got some radius, and it got a lot of extra damage. Now, once that came together, you kind of thought you might want to play this with a Voidforge. Anything that has a good bit of flat physical to it has quite a lot of synergy with Voidforge action. If you're unaware what Voidforge is, it's a weapon from Uber Elder that doesn't have too much physical to begin with, but a lot of extra elemental on the back end, 300% of an extra random element on every hit, and a bunch of area, a bunch of life. So the idea is that you have to up your own physical damage to then have decent damage being converted into elemental, since it doesn't start out with much of its own physical. Well, Sweep itself has a good 80 to 120 attached onto it, and that makes it a very tantalizing option, one of two very tantalizing options for a Voidforge build. The other one, of course, being Cyclone, but no one really cares about that because, you know, it's kind of a shit skill. Never gonna work. Fuck it. Don't even think about it. So Sweep, here we go. This is basically the first tick of a Cyclone build, and you can see that the area is huge. It's not even that big right now in these clips because all I've done is attach Pulverize and Increased Area with a couple little passives on the tree. It's really nowhere near its maximum, and yet it's almost hitting the entire screen. So you could honestly build it to be much girthier, much thicker, but I wanted to try and build a Scion for the first time in maybe 6 months, since they're kind of underused, and I had a little bit of an idea for a funky one we can do, which is Pathfinder Inquisitor. And as well as that, I'm using the Maraketh Brutal Restraint Jewel. That means you don't have a helmet, but your crits and your crit damage is lucky. So what those mean is that you will have 2 rolls for all of your attacks, and it will always take the best roll of those 2. So you are then lucky, and it means that you just have so much less bottom end on your damage. And it's an attempt to not use Abyssus, and so far it's working out fine, and I'll go over the gear and everything in just a minute. But you can see that Sweep itself hits extremely hard because of these synergies and scalings. And the idea is to always pretty much leap into a pack and one-shot things. You don't really want to have to go in for a second attack because it's pretty damn inefficient and just not the way Path of Exile is played anymore. And getting that one tap off is so extremely satisfying and actually quite doable. In this setup, with all the flat fizz being turned onto your Voidforge damage and then converted to elemental or added as extra in the end, I've got something like 1,000,000 average hit without being fully buffed into Oblivion. So if we're talking then like Vile Warchief and all the proper scalings and everything, you're probably looking at close to 1.5 million average hit, which is just ridiculous. And if we do end up going into the Abyssus route, which is still possible, it's something I'm still exploring because the no helm route is a bit of a weird one. You could end up hitting top ends of 2.5 million in a single hit, and you'll see that in just a minute that the one tap potentials are really there. It's not quite the smoothest playstyle compared to, let's say, a Cyclone, because you do have to stop, then attack, then go again, as opposed to just fluidly moving through everything like butter. But it is still a very satisfying one, and if you get enough attack speed, if you get enough area, enough damage, enough survivability, then it becomes a pretty potent skill, and something that is quite a bit more fun, I think, than your regular skills. You can see here a lot of area and a lot of one-shot potential, and just about every single betrayal encounter I've come across thus far is just a clean one-tap. It's made them pretty amusing to go against because they don't really actually do anything, and usually a lot of them just spawn into the map dead. And as always, I do think the Voidforge is criminally underrated for whatever reason, because it's pulling out quite consistently some of the most damage out of any of my melee builds, and it's, well, usually something like a 5 to 10C weapon. Mine is, not even really rolled all that amazingly, so it could get a little better, and you can get some really nice corruptions for it these days as well, which will boost your damage even further. Or you could just play a real Ascendancy instead of Scion because, well, it's just kind of something a little bit different here. But if you went a Slayer or a Berserker, you could get much better damage, and I'll probably show you how to do that as well because if you want to play with a Voidforge, well, I think it's a good idea you do the best possible thing you could possibly do. You can see there some pretty decent hits, not quite the one-taps I was looking for, but I think they should be possible with the right setup and a bit of luck, because in this setup I'm still using Pulverize, not even chucking in Ruthless for the single target yet, and once I get Ruthless in there, we're going to be dealing those big old triple damage hits that are going to wipe most of these bosses off the face of the earth. Hopefully though, we can get the scaling of the damage and the awkwardness of the one-tap playstyle rolling through the end game without much trouble, and we'll see that in the next video. But for now, let's go over the character's gear. So here is the character, a currently level 88 Scion called Avoid Tall People at ExileCon. Yeah, I'm not very tall, and it's not going to look good for me. So anyway, the character is based entirely around the Voidforge sword. Now, as you can see, not very much physical damage, but a lot of back-end damage in the gain 300% of weapon physical as extra random damage of an element. Once you stack that with something like your sweep over here, 81 to 122, it ends up being a pretty decent physical weapon, and then you've got a lot of extra damage to scale through the elemental. So you end up just, you can scale it with physical to begin with, or elemental damage after the fact, with things like increased elemental damage with attacks, penetrations, all that kind of stuff. And that's why we've built around the Inquisitor here, which has 6% enemy penetration on enemies, as well as enemies take 10% increased elemental, and then Pathfinder that has 6% enemy elemental resistance as well, penetrated. So the idea behind Voidforge usually is that the damage is ridiculous, and you won't really need all that much more damage, so you take things that are a bit more utility based, which is why Pathfinder, just as the Ascendancy as a whole, is usually very sort of tempting for a Voidforge character, just being able to keep up all your flasks, which are a lot of the time your quality of life in a character like this. So I did kind of want to do a Pathfinder, but I made a compromise and went with just Scion so that I could get plenty of passives happening and do something a little bit different than what I usually do, which is no Scions, because it's kind of dumpster at the moment. It has worked out rather well, and at the same time I wanted to incorporate the Maraketh Brutal Restraint Jewel with a Kara of Asenath, and that does this notable here, Dance with Death. So you can't use helmets, as you can see. Your critical strike chance is lucky, so that's the exact same thing as a Diamond Flask, thus effectively saving us the Diamond Flask slot, and then your damage with critical strikes is lucky as well. So not only do you have your higher chance to crit, your crits will then roll twice, and it will take whichever best roll is happening there. So that means that your minimum amount of damage is going to be seen a lot less often, and you're much more likely to see your top ends. You then also have enemies damage with critical strikes against you is lucky. So if you've ever played an Abyssus character, it does kind of hurt at times. This is a little bit similar but not quite as bad, and it's mostly going to be really bad against crit type enemies. So enemies that have powerful crits as a rare modifier, and also maps that have crit and crit multi, because if an enemy attacks you, it's got like a 10% chance to crit you, right? If it gets to attack you twice, then it has a much higher chance of critting you because it tries to crit you twice, and one of those might be the crit, and then it's going to pick the crit rather than the non-crit, and that seems to happen a little bit against the Maraketh Legion enemies, so it is kind of a dangerous passive. So far I've died to Maraketh Legions maybe like a couple times up till now, but I don't think it's quite as bad as an Abyssus still, and I've still got some life and stuff to fill out in the next few levels anyway. So that's currently the passive I'm trying to build around, and it ends up giving you a fairly respectable amount of damage, so I don't think it's going to be probably a little bit less than an Abyssus overall at the moment for my character, but it is still pretty damn competitive. It's just going to be about the second best thing you can do, and on top of that, it's letting me run a sulfur flask instead of a diamond flask, and that means that with my Inquisitor passive, I'm going to be immune to ailments while on consecrated ground. So I only need one flask that makes me immune to all my ailments, and that's a sulfur one. If I had a diamond flask here instead, I'd be a lot more susceptible to all of the ailments out there. So it's kind of just trying to min-max a bit around the node over here, and I'm not quite sure it's strictly worth it yet. On top of that, you can't have a helmet MTX, so I've done my best to pick a MTX setup for my character that doesn't really need a helm, and we've landed on this one, which kind of looks like a cosmic or celestial janitor, which is what we've gone with for the character's name. Soul Stealer body armor, all that, an illusionist weapon with Soul Stealer effect, and Arctic cloak. And that's why I called the character more or less Celestial Janitor, because our Leap Slam is nice and celestial. Our Sweep, not too celestial, but the Sun Prism Herald of Ash does make it look a bit spacey as well. So that's the scalings of the character. I then did chuck on a few of my pretty nice items from this league. Like I went with this chest so I can get Maim, which is 10% fizz damage, as well as that little bit of crit as well. Maim's not super important in this build because it's only about a 10% increase, since the actual effect of Maim on enemies won't really do anything for us. It makes them take increased physical, not elemental. A little bit of crit is nice because we do need some base crit on top of the 5, which is crappy, and I want to try and avoid using a crit gem. Ultimately, it's probably worth doing, and if you're really, trying to get the best out of your character, you'd probably just run a Slayer, get the 8 crit, which is more than what I currently have by a good margin, and run a different chest that's going to give you some bonuses, like a Shroud of the Lightless for all that penetration, like a Loreweave for all that defense. You could go a Combs. There's plenty of choices you can make instead for a Voidforge character like this. The main thing I want you to get thinking about is the fact that Voidforge is extremely nice, and also has good synergy with Sweep, and of course Cyclone. Since I'm using the damage is lucky Brutal Restraint Keystone, we also went with the Rislatha's Coil. So 39% more max physical attack damage, 31% less min physical attack. So what it does is lower your minimum but raise your maximum, and when you're rolling twice, it's going to mean that you are more often than not coming closer to your maximum amount of damage, thus making it a pretty viable belt. If I went the Abyssus route, I wouldn't be wearing this thing and I wouldn't use that Keystone. So I think it's got kind of some niche uses here, and it's just a little bit of an interesting choice, but it's going to be very easy for me to swap into Abyssus in the end and try out that sort of damage and playstyle, because then I'll just chuck on a nice damage with elements belt, maybe some flask utility, and it should be pretty smooth. Then got some endurance charge happening on this ring, same with this ring that I've been using throughout the league, and just an amulet that has some good accuracy, because we do need some accuracy, and a craftable area roll too. I also made a pair of gloves just so I could have some utility on them, which is based entirely around life and a resist, pretty easy to get, and then you go with attack speed, converted, and damage during flask as a little bit of a multi-mod. I also grabbed Wind Shriek boots for a second curse because this character doesn't have that much penetration happening, so I wanted to make sure I got a second curse in the build as an LE weakness. We do have Assassin's Mark and then LE weakness as a blasphemy, and it seems to be working out rather well, as well as a triple balanced Wise Oak. Not quite triple balanced yet, I will fix that later for lightning resist through a jewel. But the idea is to get the triple balance so that you can have triple penetration and triple damage at the same time. That is basically most of what you need to know about the character. The actual 6-link setup here for Sweep is Sweep, early damage with attacks, Pulverize, increased area, melee fizz, and close combat. Close combat won't show up in your tooltip, so bear that in mind, and a lot of the time if you're not directly next to the enemy, then you're not getting much benefit from that. So make sure if you want max damage out of your close combat, you're using it right next to things, but it's pretty nice to have for your Leap Slam as well. The Leap Slam itself is just faster attacks, Blood Magic, Fortify, Leap Slam. I'm tempted to put it up into a 5 or a 6 link just so that I can get like some other stuff on there, like Rage, Endurance Charge on Stun, something like that. But currently my 6 link Voidforge that I corrupted myself for 6 whites is just sitting here doing nothing but a pile of utility stuff. We got War Banner, level 9 Precision, Blood and Sand, Stone Golem, Ancestral War Chief, and Blood Rage. I wanted to get a Voidforge with increased area, didn't manage to do that yet, and I've corrupted a few of these through the temple, just got 6 whites, and you know, it's kinda whatever. So it doesn't really matter if it's linked or if it's got any corruptions, but you can obviously take it into much higher damage ranges by using a better Voidforge with better corruptions. And if you had another Helm slot, well, you could link up your War Chief or get the cast from damage taken set up. You can do quite a lot of other things on top of what I've currently done, which is not too much, just a pile of utility. Mostly, just want to get you guys thinking about Voidforge again, and if we want to incorporate Voidforge's damage into Path of Building, I know that a lot of people don't know how to do it, and it typically doesn't look very good in Path of Building when you first put it in. That's because the elemental damage stat doesn't work when it's random like that, so we simply edit the line to have 100% of your weapon physical damage extra fire, and then copy and paste it and edit it to cold and lightning. So this still gives us 300 and averages out between the 3, and you can see something like 2.4 million sweep DPS or some shit like that with big ass average hits at the moment. There is no way that you can really incorporate the keystone, I don't think, currently through Path of Building for the lucky rolls, so I can't help you with that. You just have to trust that it's a good pile of extra damage. For now, guys, that's the character, that's Voidforge. I can't believe I have to tell people every couple leagues that this thing is insane and great value for money, but here we are again, Voidforge. Pretty worth it. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.